What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Hip Hop Flash, the channel where we break down the biggest stories, hidden details, and real facts shaping the world of hip hop. Let's get straight into it.
Mass hallucination. That's the exact phrase Kendrick Lamar just handed the entire internet. And the reason your algorithm has been shaken for the last 72 hours is because nobody, and I mean nobody, outside a very small circle of people who have been paying attention, actually understands what he meant when he called himself the good kid. You think this is about Compton. You think this is a nostalgia play. You think Kendrick Duckworth just did a callback to a 2012 album title because the anniversary is coming up and the marketing team told him it would trend. That is the surface. That is the decoy. That is exactly what you were supposed to think. And the fact that you thought it is the entire reason the man is smiling in every photograph that is surfaced this week. Because the good kid is not a title. The good kid is a legal position. The good kid is a status. The good kid is the name of the person in the room who was never supposed to be able to speak. And the second Kendrick Lamar put that phrase back on wax in the year 2026, he was not remembering his debut album, he was filing a document. And I need you to sit with that for a second, because everything you have been told about this rollout, about this beef, about this entire era of Kendrick versus Aubrey Drake Bram has been framed around the wrong question. The question was never who won. The question was never who has the better bars. The question was never who has the harder catalog. The only question that has ever mattered is who was in the room, who signed the paper, and who has been carrying the weight of a career that was never fully theirs. And when we get to the part of this video where I walk you through the 3-project timeline, and I promise you we are getting there, you are going to understand why Kendrick calling himself the good kid in 2026 is the most dangerous single sentence anyone has said in hip-hop since the word certified pedophile left his mouth on national radio. Personal stakes for Kendrick, cultural stakes for the entire West Coast, systemic stakes for a machine that has been running on ghost labor for over a decade. 3 timelines, 1 confession, and if you leave right now, you are going to hear this song 100 more times without ever hearing it once. So do not leave. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me set the table for you, because the context here is deeper than most of the reaction channels have been willing to go, and I think a lot of people are missing the actual weight of what just happened. Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, the man from Compton, California, the man who just came off the largest cultural victory in modern hip-hop history after the Not Like Us moment that shook the industry to its foundation, has now returned with a track alongside Failed titled around the concept of the good kid. And immediately, the coded language started flying. The Drake passage, mass hallucination, ill education, 3 projects during the come-up, if you know, you know. These are not throwaway lines. These are not clever wordplay for the sake of clever wordplay. Every single one of these phrases is doing 3, 4, 5 layers of work at the same time. And the reason I'm making this video right now at this exact moment is because I have watched creator after creator run through this song and treat it like a normal Kendrick verse. It is not a normal Kendrick verse. It is a confession disguised as a hook. It is a legal statement disguised as a hook. It is a decade of held silence finally coming out in coded form, because the coded form is the only form that survives the paperwork. And you have to understand what paperwork we are talking about. When Kendrick was coming up in the early 2010s, the industry was structured in a very specific way. Publishing splits, ghostwriting credits, NDAs that ran 7, 10, sometimes 15 years, and a whole architecture of legal instruments designed to make sure that the person who wrote the words was not necessarily the person who got the credit or the check. That architecture has protected a lot of careers. That architecture has also destroyed a lot of writers. And what Kendrick is doing right now on this record in the year 2026 is he is standing at the edge of that architecture, and he is describing it in language that is just abstract enough to keep him out of a courtroom and just specific enough that the culture is going to eventually piece together every single receipt. The stakes musically are obvious. This is the man who just body-bagged his biggest rival and is now doubling back for a second, more surgical strike. The stakes culturally are massive, because if the coded reading of this song is correct, then everything the mainstream told you about who built modern rap, who wrote what, who owns what, and who deserves what is upside down. And the stakes financially are the reason the Drake camp has been so quiet this week. Because The Good Kid is not a diss record. The Good Kid is a receipt. And when a receipt drops, the only people who panic are the people who owe the money. So the question I want you to sit with, the question that is going to carry us through everything I am about to show you is this. What does it mean when the biggest artist in the culture stops rapping about being from Compton and starts rapping about being from a contract? What does it mean when The Good Kid stops being an origin story and starts being a legal identity? And why now? Let me start with what is visible on the surface, because the visible layer alone is already doing more damage than most reaction channels have acknowledged. The first surface evidence, and the one that got the entire internet spinning within hours of the drop, is the phrase mass hallucination itself. Kendrick did not say it once. Kendrick did not say it twice. He built the entire hook around it, and then he layered it with the phonetic breakdown that everybody on Twitter caught within the first 48 hours. Ho, Lucy, Nation. Ho for manipulation, Lucy for Lucifer, Nation for the collective. That is not a coincidence. That is not a stretch. That is a man deliberately writing a phrase that decodes cleanly into a three-part accusation about who is running the game, how they are running it, and who is being manipulated. And the reason I am starting here is because the phonetic decoding is the entry point. Once you understand that Kendrick is willing to embed that level of coded language into a single hook, you have to go back through every other line in the song with the same lens, and the picture that emerges is devastating. The second piece of surface evidence is the phrase Drake's trap. Now listen, a lot of people heard that and thought, okay, this is a diss, he's calling out Drake, moving on. That's not what's happening. The phrase Drake's trap is doing double work. It is naming the antagonist explicitly, yes, but it is also referencing the Drake Passage, the actual body of water between South America and Antarctica that has claimed over 10,000 lives and 800 ships. That is the deadliest stretch of water on the planet, and Kendrick is naming the industry, naming the rap game, naming the passage through which every young artist has to travel, and he is telling you that the water is deliberately being stirred by someone at the bottom. That is not a bar, that is a map. The third piece of surface evidence is the phrase ill education, which visually renders as the Roman numeral 3, I. And the number 3 is not random. Kendrick specifies 3 projects during the come-up. And if you know your Drake discography, you know exactly which 3 projects sit in that window. So Far Gone, Thank Me Later, Take Care. That is the exact era that
Everybody in the industry has been whispering about for over a decade, and Kendrick just put the number on wax in a form that cannot be misread. The fourth piece of surface evidence is the line, if you know, you know. A phrase that has become a meme, a phrase that has been used 1,000 times, but in this specific context, delivered in this specific cadence, coming from this specific artist, it is a direct signal to a specific group of people who have been sitting on this information for years. If you know is not a bar aimed at fans. It is a bar aimed at insiders. It is a nod to the writers, the engineers, the A&Rs, the assistants, the tour managers, the people who were in those rooms and have been waiting for someone with enough leverage to finally say something. And Kendrick, coming off Not Like Us, is now that person. He has the leverage, he has the platform, he has the untouchable status, and he is using it to name a decade of silence in a way that the paperwork cannot touch him for. Does everybody understand how crazy this actually is? Because I want to make sure we are on the same page before we go any deeper. The man is not making a diss record, he is making a testimony. And the testimony is being delivered inside a song because the song is the only container that can hold that kind of truth without triggering the legal machinery designed to bury it. And oh, do I have more. I promise you, the surface layer is the shallow end of this pool, and the fans who have been running defense for the other side all week are really not going to like what comes next, because when we get past the visible bars and into the cultural evidence, the reactions, the cosigns, the deleted posts, the industry whispers, the picture gets significantly darker, and the number of people who have quietly signaled their alignment with what Kendrick is saying is going to shock you. Stay with me on this one, because the next section is where the receipts stop being metaphorical and start being social. Now let's move into the cultural layer, because this is where the story stops being about lyrics and starts being about who is standing where when the smoke clears. The first piece of cultural evidence is the response, or more accurately, the non-response from the Drake camp. And I want you to think about this carefully. This is a camp that has historically responded to everything. A subliminal on a mixtape gets a full press cycle. A tweet from a rival's cousin gets a diss track. A meme gets an Instagram story. And yet, when Kendrick drops a song that phonetically decodes the word hallucination into Ho Lucy Nation and names 3 specific projects from the come-up era, the response has been silence. Not measured silence, not strategic silence, the kind of silence you get from a legal team telling their client to stop tweeting immediately. And that silence, that specific quality of silence, is itself a piece of evidence, because in the culture we come from, silence from the accused is not neutrality. Silence is confirmation. The second piece of cultural evidence is the reaction from the ghostwriting community itself, the writers, the producers, the credited and uncredited contributors who have been circling this story for years. Quentin Miller, whose name became synonymous with this entire conversation back in 2015 when Meek Mill first opened the door, has been notably active on social media in the days following the drop. And while he has not said anything explicit, the posts have been pointed enough that the community has taken notice. That is a piece of cultural evidence. That is a signal. That is a man who has been living with this story for a decade, quietly acknowledging that something in the culture just shifted. The third piece of cultural evidence, and this one is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, is the West Coast response. When Kendrick dropped Not Like Us, the West Coast lit up. Every OG, every young artist, every DJ, every radio host in Los Angeles came out and co-signed the moment. This time, with the Good Kid record, the response has been more selective, more deliberate, more surgical. It is not a viral wave. It is a targeted acknowledgement from the specific people who have historically been in position to know what actually happened in those studio rooms. And when the acknowledgement comes from that specific slice of the culture, that means something different than a general viral moment. It means the people who were actually there are nodding. The fourth piece of cultural evidence is the fan community reaction on Reddit, on Twitter, on the deeper hip-hop forums where the actual dissection happens. Within 72 hours of the drop, entire threads had formed decoding the phonetic layers, mapping the 3 projects, cross-referencing the timeline with the ghostwriting rumors that have been floating for years. And the striking thing is how quickly the consensus formed. This was not a slow build. This was not a debate. The community read the song, ran the decoder, and arrived at the same conclusion almost simultaneously. That kind of rapid consensus does not happen unless the coded language is unambiguous to the people who have been paying attention. Now, I want to be fair here, because I have seen the counter-argument, and it is worth addressing. The counter-argument goes something like this. Kendrick is a master of layered writing, and reading ghostwriting confessions into every metaphor is a stretch. Not everything has to be a receipt. Sometimes a bar is just a bar. And I hear that. I genuinely hear that. But the problem with that counter-argument is that it does not account for the specificity. It does not account for the number 3. It does not account for the phrase, if you know, you know. It does not account for the Drake passage double meaning. It does not account for the silence from the other camp. Any one of these things could be a coincidence. All of these things together, in the same song, in the same rollout, coming from an artist who has just spent 2 years telling you exactly what he thinks, that is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And when the pattern is that specific, the burden of proof shifts. It is no longer on the people saying this is a confession. It is on the people saying it is not. And so far, nobody in a position to actually refute the reading has stepped forward to refute it. What we have instead is silence from the camp, activity from the writers, targeted acknowledgement from the West Coast, and rapid consensus from the community that has been watching this story develop for a decade. That is not 4 separate data points. That is one story told 4 different ways. And the story is that the coded reading of The Good Kid is correct, and the culture is quietly agreeing with it in every language it has available.
Now, before we go to the next layer, I need you to brace yourself, because everything we have talked about so far, the bars, the phonetic decoding, the cultural signals, the silence, all of that lives on the entertainment side of this conversation. What comes next lives on the business side, and the business side is where the actual damage is done, because a rap beef ends with a diss track, a ghostwriting scandal ends with a career. Let me shift gears completely, because I need you to understand something about the machinery underneath this story that most reaction content is not equipped to explain. The music industry, particularly the hip-hop side of the music industry, in the 2009 to 2013 window, operated on a very specific legal architecture that most fans have never had explained to them properly. And without understanding that architecture, you cannot understand why the Good Kid record is landing the way it is landing. So let me walk you through 3 separate but connected
layers of the system, because each one contributes to the picture, and only when you see all 3 together does the full weight of what Kendrick is doing become clear. The first systemic angle is the publishing structure. In the traditional major label deal of that era, publishing was divided into 2 halves, the songwriter share and the publisher share. The songwriter share went, in theory, to whoever actually wrote the words. The publisher share went to whoever owned the publishing company, which in most major label deals was the label itself or a subsidiary. What this meant in practice is that if you were a young writer coming into a session where an established artist needed material, you could absolutely contribute, sometimes substantially, to a hit record, and depending on how the paperwork was structured, your name might appear in the credits or it might not. And your check might be a lump sum work-for-hire payment that severed your ongoing royalty rights forever. That is not speculation. That is how the system was legally designed to function, and there is a decade of industry reporting from outlets like Music Business Worldwide and Hits Daily Double documenting exactly how these structures operated. Now apply that to the specific 3-project window that Kendrick is naming. So Far Gone, Thank Me Later, Take Care. Those 3 projects moved the entire industry. Those 3 projects made the artist in question one of the biggest names in music. And the writing credits on those projects, particularly the deep credits, the not just the lead writer credits, have been a subject of quiet industry discussion for over a decade. Kendrick is not making up the discussion. He is inheriting it. He is stepping into a conversation that has been happening at low volume for years, and he is turning the volume up. The second systemic angle is the NDA architecture. Non-disclosure agreements in the music industry are not just about protecting trade secrets. They are used to bind session participants, ghostwriters, engineers, and even backup vocalists to silence about who did what in the studio. Reports from industry attorneys who have spoken publicly, including in Rolling Stone and in various legal industry podcasts, have described NDAs from that era that ran 7 to 10 years and included penalty clauses that would financially devastate anyone who broke them. Now do the math. The 3 projects Kendrick is referencing dropped between 2009 and 2011. 7 to 10-year NDAs from that window start expiring somewhere between 2016 and 2021. We are now in 2026. Every single one of those agreements, if they existed, is now expired. And the timing of Kendrick's record, the precise, deliberate timing, starts to look less like a callback and more like a calendar. He is dropping this song at the exact moment when everybody who was legally silenced can finally speak, and he is opening the door for them by putting the coded confession on wax first. That is not a diss track. That is a starting gun. The third systemic angle is the streaming economy and the media control apparatus. Because even if the writers can now speak, even if the NDAs have expired, there is a second layer of protection that the established artist in question has spent the last decade building, and that is influence over the media ecosystem itself. Certain outlets have been notably reluctant to cover the ghostwriting story with the same intensity they cover other industry controversies. Certain interviewers have been notably careful about the questions they ask. Certain playlists, certain radio programmers, certain streaming curators have been notably aligned with a specific artist's promotional cycles in ways that industry insiders have quietly documented. This is not conspiracy. This is how major label promotion works, and it has been extensively reported on. What Kendrick is doing with the Good Kid record is he is bypassing that ecosystem entirely. He is not going through the traditional promotional channels. He is not sitting for interviews. He is not doing the press cycle. He is dropping the record and letting the culture do the decoding, because he understands that the culture is now more powerful than the media apparatus that used to control the narrative. And that shift in power, the shift from media gatekeepers to community consensus, is the third systemic angle, and it is arguably the most important one, because without that shift, the Good Kid record does not land the way it is landing. Without that shift, the coded language gets buried by a coordinated PR response. Without that shift, we are still having the conversation the media wants us to have. But the shift has happened. The gatekeepers have lost their monopoly, and Kendrick, sitting on top of the biggest cultural victory of the last 5 years, is the artist with the leverage, credibility, and community backing to actually pull this off. 3 systemic angles: publishing, NDAs, media control, all 3 collapsing at the same time, all 3 creating the exact conditions in which a coded confession like the Good Kid can not only be dropped, but can actually land, actually stick, actually change the culture's understanding of a decade of music. And that is why this is not a rap beef. That is why this is not a diss track. That is why the silence from the other camp is not a strategy. It is a symptom. So let me tell you what I actually think is happening here, because everything we have walked through, the surface evidence, the cultural signals, the systemic architecture, all of it points in the same direction, and the direction is uncomfortable enough that I want to make sure I say it carefully but clearly. What I believe, based on the coded language in the Good Kid record, based on the specific number 3, based on the naming of the 3 projects during the come-up, based on the phrase, "if you know," based on the timing that aligns exactly with the expiration window of standard-era NDAs, based on the silence from the accused camp, based on the targeted acknowledgement from the writing community, and based on the systemic conditions that make this moment possible, what I believe is that Kendrick Lamar has just filed the culture's first public accounting of the ghostwriting era, and he has done it in a form that cannot be legally answered, cannot be effectively refuted, and cannot be buried by the media apparatus that has historically protected the accused. That is the truth bomb. That is the reveal. That is what the Good Kid actually means in the year 2026. It means the record is not a nostalgia play. It is a legal instrument. It means the phrase Good Kid is not an identity. It is a status. The status of the young writer who was in the room, who did the work, who signed the paperwork, who took the check, who honored the silence, and who is now finally protected enough by his own cultural position to describe what happened without saying it in a way that can be sued into oblivion. And the consequences of this, the actual consequences, not the entertainment consequences, are enormous. For Kendrick personally, this cements his position as not just the biggest artist in hip-hop, but as the artist who is willing to use his platform to name the systems that made the previous generation of stars. For the culture, this is a course correction that has been building for a decade, a re-examination of who wrote what, who deserves what, who owes what. And for the industry, this is the beginning of a conversation that a lot of executives, a lot of managers, a lot of publishing companies have been dreading for years. Because if the Good Kid record is what I believe it is, then every other artist who was in one of those rooms during that era now has permission to speak. Every other writer who signed one of those NDAs now has cover. Every other insider who has been sitting on receipts now has a cultural moment they can attach their testimony to. And once that door opens, it does not close. That is why the silence from the other camp is so loud.
Stirring. That is why the West Coast is nodding surgically instead of celebrating publicly. This is not the end of a beef. This is the beginning of an audit. And the man who started the audit is the same man who just told the culture, in the plainest coded language he could use, that he was the good kid, the young writer, the trapped ghost, the one who watched somebody else build a career on his pen and stayed quiet until the paperwork expired. Allegedly, reportedly, sources close to the industry have been suggesting exactly this pattern for years. And now, in 2026, with the leverage he has, with the cultural moment he has built, Kendrick has done what nobody else in his position was ever willing to do. He put the receipt on wax. And once a receipt is on wax, the receipt is permanent.
And here is what I want you to walk away with, because I think this is the piece that a lot of people are going to miss in the noise of the next few weeks. The hero of this story is not just winning. The hero of this story is winning in a way that changes the entire game for everyone who comes after him. Kendrick Lamar, the guy who does every job to 100%, the guy who has been unfazed by every attempt to knock him off his position, the guy who is still winning without even really being outside. That man just used his cultural capital not to enrich himself, not to sell more units, not to lock in another endorsement deal, but to open a door that has been welded shut for over a decade. Think about that. Think about what it means when the biggest artist in the culture uses his biggest moment not for personal gain, but for structural correction. That is not entertainment, that is leadership. And when you walk back through the story we just told, the surface bars, the phonetic decoding, the cultural signals, the systemic breakdown, the timing that aligns with NDA expirations, the silence from the accused camp, every single one of those pieces reframes through this lens. The Good Kid was never just a callback. The Good Kid was a manifesto. And the person delivering the manifesto is the exact right person to deliver it because he is untouchable, because he is credible, because he has already won the beef that could have been used to discredit him, and because he has the discipline to say what he needs to say in a form that cannot be legally answered. One person makes music that opens legal doors. The other makes music that closes them. One person uses coded language to name a decade of silence. The other stays silent because there is nothing safe to say. That is the contrast. That is the entire story in one sentence. And the beautiful thing about it, the genuinely beautiful thing about it, is that the resolution has already happened. We are not waiting for justice. We are watching justice unfold in real time, in slow motion, in a form that is going to keep paying dividends for years. Because once the Good Kid record exists, once the coded confession is in the culture, once the writing community has the cover it needs to speak, the correction is inevitable. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And the when is starting now, in the year 2026, with a song that most people are still treating like a normal rap release. It is not a normal rap release, it is a hinge point. And on the far side of the hinge, the culture looks different, the credits look different, the conversation looks different. The right person is in the right position, holding the right leverage, saying the right thing at the right time. Things are going to be fine. The evidence speaks for itself. And the Good Kid, the one who did the work and stayed quiet, is finally getting to narrate his captivity in real time, on his own terms, with the full weight of the culture behind him. But listen, this is only the start, and I want to be specific about what is coming next, because there are at least 2 concrete developments in this story that you are going to want to track over the next few weeks. The first is the writing community response. Now that Kendrick has opened the door, watch for statements, subliminal or otherwise, from specific writers who have been connected to the 3-project window. Those statements are coming. Some of them will be direct, some of them will be coded. All of them will add another layer to the picture that is already forming. The second development to track is the media response, or more specifically, the media non-response. Pay close attention to which outlets cover this story with depth and which outlets treat it like a normal rap news cycle. The gap between those 2 categories is going to tell you everything you need to know about which parts of the media ecosystem are still aligned with the old power structure and which parts are ready to move forward. Both of those developments are going to unfold in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and the only way you are not going to miss any of it is if you are subscribed right now. Hit the bell, hit the like, drop your reading of The Good Kid in the comments. I want to see which layers you caught and which ones you missed, because I am reading every comment on this one. And if you thought this breakdown was heavy, wait until you see the next video, because I am going all the way in on the specific timeline of the 3 projects Kendrick named, cross-referenced against every publicly reported ghostwriting rumor from that era, and I am naming names, dates, and paperwork trails that have been sitting in industry reporting for a decade, waiting for somebody to connect them.
The man you think you know built his empire in a very specific window, with very specific help, under very specific legal structures. And when I lay it all out in order, the picture that emerges is going to change how you hear every song from that era for the rest of your life. That video is coming next. Do not miss it. The good kid just started the audit. I'm about to walk you through the ledger.